Hey, welcome to the Go-To Physio podcast, the podcast that helps you get real-world results with real people while also helping you become the go-to therapist in your town. I hope you enjoy the show. Hey, you're very welcome to episode 3 of the Go-To Physio podcast. My name is Dave O'Sullivan and it's great to have you again here with me today. Now, one of the big aims of the Go-To Physio podcast is to actually help you get real world results with real people in the real world. Okay, because again, I think a lot of people, they can sound good in theory, but actually when all's said and done, how do we implement this stuff to get long-lasting, meaningful results for the patients? And what I want to do now is switch gears from the last couple of episodes, where the first episode was all about my business growth plan, the 7 phases I use, from confidence and clarity, which allows you to explain effectively to the patient, which allows them to have confidence and clarity in you and the plan, which allows adherence, buy-in, decrease cancellations, increase revenue, ethically, increase word of mouth referrals because you're getting results, which allows you to have a busy clinic, which allows you then to hire other therapists, and then you go through the phases again with those therapists of making sure they have confidence and clarity. So then we looked into the steps of phase 1, which is having confidence and clarity. In episode 2, I outlined my first 4 steps, which was all about how we link the subjective assessment to the objective assessment and start to make sense of that, so then we're in the best possible position to effectively explain to the patient. So before now we get really far into the communication skills and we start to look at the other steps in the 12 steps of my successful discharge, if you want to call it that, or my return to play, or my return to life, whatever you want to call it. I want to start looking at maybe some stuff that's going to help you implement this stuff in the real world. And today's blog post, it's going to be all about the glute muscles. There's a glute guy, especially I know when I first started out, it was all about the glutes, and I will put my hand up, and I've been guilty of that no matter what. You came in, I laugh when I look back at it now. When I came in, you had a knee pain, you had Achilles, you had a calf tear, you had a hamstring tear, you had a quad tear, you had back pain, you had neck pain, you hurt your little finger, you were getting glute exercises, and I look back and look, as I said, it's interesting to see how things have evolved. And at that time I was doing my best because that's all I knew, and I thought I was, and I think I was genuinely doing my best for my patients. But what I want to do now is just, again, if you do give glute exercises for every pathology, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but what I hopefully want to do in today's episode is just give you an awareness. And again, we're going to start to ask some questions now and start to go back into that higher level critical thinking that I talk about. Okay, so with the glutes, the glute muscles, they're muscles obviously at the hip, but what I want to think about a little bit is what impacts that glute muscle to be successful. Okay, why do the glutes switch off in inverted commas? Why don't people use their glutes? Or certainly, why do us as therapists think people don't use their glutes? Now, of course, you're using your glutes, because if you didn't use your glutes, you'd be on the floor, okay? But you know what I mean, okay? And again, look, I'm over this whole, some smart ass coming on and, picking at every single word I say, okay? I'm gonna in this podcast, I'm gonna sacrifice a little bit of accuracy to help you understand, okay? And I say that all my courses, and going off a little bit of a tangent there, but I think these days, online, people are like just literally critiquing every single word that people are writing, trying to knock them down. So again, I'm going to keep this very simple today, because if I can help 1 or 2 therapists, change their thought process for the better, which is going to help their patients get better results, then it's worth that little bit of sacrifice and accuracy. Okay, so when we look at the glutes and why the glutes aren't maybe doing as much work, now that's the term that I prefer to utilize. Why aren't the hip joint muscles doing enough work? Okay, that's, I think, a much better question to ask than why are the glutes not firing or have some kind of inhibition, if they actually do. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, we've got an accompanying blog, okay, with this, where I've got a video and it's a biomechanical comparison between a professional sprinter and a collegiate sprinter, and it was posted by EM Sports Science, so I want to give them full credit for this, and I give them credit in the video, and I just look at that video and I just talk over the video because I think it's really, really interesting. So as that foot hits the floor, so now we're talking sprinting, okay, so again, we're talking high level, what we need our athlete to get back to. Now in my return to play 1-day course and in my mentorship, you know, whenever we're designing a treatment plan, first thing I'd say is, right, we always work back from the outcome. So the outcome for you, for a lot of your patients, will be to get them back to high level loading. For a lot of people, that could be high level sprinting, change of direction, deceleration, etc. So I think it's good to look at sprinting, and you know, if we get somewhere close to that, then we're doing well with most of our patients. So as that foot hits the floor, okay, let's think about this, what has to happen. Okay, now again, it's not as straightforward as I'm going to say it, but I'm going to sacrifice a little bit of accuracy here so that you can understand what I'm trying to say. Okay, so as that foot hits the floor, what I want to happen is I want to have, give or take, 25% of that ground reaction force distributed from the calf, 25% from the hamstring, 25% through the quad, 25% through the glute. Okay, that's what I ideally want to happen. Again, give or take percentages. Now, I appreciate if we're talking elastic energy, around 50% of that happens below the knee. Okay, but just humor me for a second. So not only that, when that foot hits the floor, I want all of those muscles to do their job, and I want them to work together to distribute that load through the limb. Okay, I want to send as much of that energy that we absorb to the tendons, and I want to reuse as much of that energy, return that energy in the form of elastic energy as much as possible for sprinting. Okay, now walking, obviously not as much elastic energy, but similar kind of concept. Okay, so when that foot hits the floor, okay, I want everything to do its job, but not only that, I want everything to do its job in 3D. Okay, because even when that foot hits the floor, and depending on the position of the ankle and the foot, the terrain, etc., I want to tolerate that load. Okay, so if we talk frontal plane here, I want 50% of that load tolerance through going up the medial side, 50% going through the lateral hip. Now it's probably more than 50% on the lateral hip. You get my idea. Same in the transverse plane. I want to distribute that load, those transverse fibers of all the different muscles. I want them to be doing their job as well, so that we're not having to do excessive work, if you want to put it that way, in one plane. Okay, and this is interesting. And when you look at people, an objective assessment, you know, toe touch, backward bend, side flex, rotate, you're nearly every time you're going to find one plane where that person is really good, and then you may find one, you may find two planes where that person has got decreased movement, maybe variability, you want to call it, or an ability to utilize the leg with the rib cage and challenge their base of support. So when the foot hits the floor, we want the muscles of the calf, the hamstring, the quad, the glutes to do 25% each, give or take. Okay, but not only that, we want all the different fibers in the different planes. We want all of them to do their job as well. And that's what I'm working back to with my rehab, is I just want everything to do its job. I don't just want one thing to do its job, okay? I want everything to do its job. And that's a big point that I'll make with the vast majority of my rehab. I want to integrate the whole limb as much as possible. Now, the vast majority of my rehab, I think it's there's a big neurological component to it, but a lot of it's coordination, okay? But it's putting the body in positions, letting the brain, the spinal cord, and the various other parts figure it out itself. Okay, so this kind of self-organizing model, if you will. So as that foot hits the floor, we want that ground reaction force to come up. We want everything to do its job. Okay, said another way, we want, ideally, okay, that's what we want. But let's say, for instance, someone comes to us with either an Achilles issue or a patella tendon issue, okay? And we look at that person and we actually notice, we've got a video of them for argument's sake, sprinting, okay? You know, again, hypothetical here. They show us a video, and what we find is that when that foot hits the floor, we tend to see him sink. So as that foot hits the floor, the knee tends to flex a little bit, okay? So we lose that stiffness around the knee. We lose the co-contraction of the knee. Okay, so ideally the foot hits the floor. That knee, it's not, it's slightly flexed, okay, 20 degrees-ish, okay, but when the foot hits the floor, the knee stays with a good co-contraction. It doesn't continue to flex or travel forward as that foot hits the floor, okay? So what would that indicate if the knee started to flex? Well, in terms of what's doing work here, okay, we're getting a big eccentric contraction through our quads and also through our soleus. Okay, so again, they're going to work really, really hard here. So then, if we look at our ideal model of everything doing 25%, we would see here now that the hamstrings, instead of doing the 25, we would cross that out. We would say, right, that's doing 5%. If the knee is doing the majority of work, then the hip isn't doing a whole lot probably. It may have to decelerate a little bit depending on the angle of the trunk. That's probably going to be doing 5 as well. Okay, so the quadriceps now are probably, you know, we've got 40 there that we're missing, 40%. So we've got 25% from the hamstring, 25% from the hip. They're down to 5 for argument's sake, each 5% contribution. So now we've got that 40% extra. Okay, so that 40% extra, we're going to give it to the knee, to the muscles of maybe the quads and maybe the soleus. So now all of a sudden we've got this person as their foot hits the floor, and they're using maybe 65 to 80% load, and a lot of that is happening through the quad. Okay, so that quad is eccentrically loading. Instead of being able to send that energy to the tendons, a lot of it's being absorbed in the muscle, eccentric load. Then obviously there's going to be a lot more load now going to the patella tendon, rather than distributing that load through the hamstring and then allowing the hip to do work. Okay, so again, if we're sinking, the foot hits the floor, the knee continues to flex even as the foot's hit the floor. So we're getting a big eccentric load through the quad and through the soleus. So then as we push off, okay, or as we project our body weight forward, the knees flex. So then one of the first things we're probably going to be doing now is that knee's going to extend. Okay, so instead of achieving true hip extension, what I think is happening a lot, and again, you're going to see this with the video much more clearly. A picture is worth 1,000 words. So if you're driving in your car, make sure you go back to our blog post on www.thegotofysio.com/blog, and you'll see the blog post titled "The glute is only as good as the gastro and the hamstring allows." Okay, and then you'll see the video. I'll talk over it, and you'll get a good visual. So as that foot's about to push off, and we're about to get our body weight starting to think about going towards our other leg, we're probably going to have that knee starting to extend very, very early. Because again, if we've eccentrically loaded the quads and the soleus, we're probably going to use those again now. So as that knee starts to extend, okay, the knee's doing work. So rather than getting true hip extension, what I see happening a lot clinically is that we get this fake hip extension. And we get hip extension, okay, obviously it's hip extension, but it's not active hip extension. So we get this hip extension through the knee snapping back, okay? Now, if you've ever worked in rugby union, rugby league, I'm sure you can appreciate a lot of islanders, certainly that I've worked with, they would have displayed this. Now, whether it's got to do with the flat foot or whatever, that's a story for another day. You'll see a lot of people, they'll snap the knee back. Okay, and I remember, you know, looking back in my days with Leeds Rhinos, we had a legend of a guy, and you know, he was a guy that had a lot of knee issues, and he had that classic snap back, and I was, you know, doing glutes till the sun came home, and we were able to help him a little bit, but nowhere near as effective. I know if I had him now, you know, I know we'd be able to make a real impact with some of the stuff that we're going to talk about now. Hey, I hope you're enjoying today's show. For more clinical content and tips to help you implement this content in the real world, please visit thegotofysio.com for more information, including my 6-step patient adherence checklist, which you can download for free. And also there's more blog content that helps you implement this stuff in the real world. You'll also find links to my YouTube show, the Go-To Physio Show, as well as lots of more information to help you become the go-to therapist, helping real patients get real results in the real world. So stay with me, okay? Foot hits the floor, knee flexes a little bit. Then as they push off, knee extends back, so the knee's doing work. If the knee's doing work and the knee's coming back, then the hip, it's probably going to be a bit more passive. Now, the problem as we're trying to come through is as the knee comes back, okay, and we get that happening from the quads, then we're going to put the glute in pretty much end range straight away. So the glute's now going to be in a much shorter position. It's going to alter the length-tension relationship with the glute. It's going to make it a lot more energy expensive for them to do the same job as if the knee had stayed still and we allowed the hip to do work. Okay, so ideally what we want to see is as the foot hits the floor, that we can delay that knee extension until the very last minute, or specifically, not minute, but specifically, okay, there'll be someone having a go at me, specifically as the weight goes onto the toes. Okay, so you can see in this video, as we toe off, that's where we want to see ideally the knee extension. Whereas what we'll see is the foot hits the floor and the weight's around midfoot area, the knee will usually tend to snap back. And then obviously as they get onto their toes, then we've pretty much gone through that full knee extension. And then usually what we'll see coupled with that is an arch of the back. Whereas what ideally we want to happen as the foot hits the floor, we want that knee to be able to delay knee extension, okay? So the better we can keep that co-contraction at the knee, okay? If we can delay knee extension, then what that allows us to do is that allows us to then do work at the hip, okay? We do work at the hip, then as our body weight travels forward more and we come onto our toes, then the knee can extend, and then we can do work at the knee also, okay, in terms of actual force production, okay? So if you look at the function of the hamstring and the gastro biarticular muscles, okay, ideally we want them to work under isometric-like conditions, give or take, okay? Again, doesn't really bother me, you know, if it's true isometric or if there's a little bit of eccentric happening. I'll be honest with you, that argument, yeah, I appreciate it. It'll be good to know, but I would much rather focus my attention on how can I implement this stuff into my rehab. How can I, you know, apply it in the real world, and give or take that little bit. You know, I'll let everyone else worry about that, and then when we kind of have definitive evidence, that's when then I'll start to maybe, you know, reflect again on you know, if there's anything I need to change. But back to the point, as that foot hits the floor, we delay knee extension. The hamstring and gastro are critical there to resist knee extension, because that co-contraction is going to happen if the hamstring, now specifically the distal hamstring and specifically the proximal gastro, can resist knee extension, okay? So the hamstrings, we appreciate that they're critical for sprinting. If we can get the hamstring and the gastro to delay knee extension, okay, because momentum's pulling us forward onto our foot anyways, onto our forefoot. If we can delay that knee extension, now the hip can do work, Okay, so now we can have a much better length tension relationship for the hip to actually do work. Okay, and then when that's done its work, then hopefully we can get that sequence in, so then the quad can finish the motion. So don't get me wrong, I'm not against knee extension. I just think this term triple extension is a little bit misleading, because what we want is we want hip and plantar flexion while we delay knee extension, and then when we get onto our towards the end of our forefoot onto our toes, then we want knee extension. Okay, whereas I think a lot of what happened these days is when people are walking, I think a lot of people that don't have good distal hamstring proximal gastro functioning, so I think the knees snapping back, the quads are doing a lot of work. Where's that force going? It's going down into the patellofemoral joint, it's going to the tendon. Your typical arthritic patient, okay, knee arthritis, okay, all of these people, I think it's a very, very common thing that's happening, not just in high level sport, okay? So ideally what we want to see, the foot hits the floor, the knee delays knee extension, which allows the hip to do work, and then the knee can extend at the end of the movement. Whereas, as I said, if our foot hits the floor, the knee starts to snap back straight away. All of a sudden now we're in a passive hip extension, so to speak. And if the glute's trying to be active here, we're bringing the glute into end range. So it's going to have to produce a lot more force to do the same work. And I for one, think the brain's a lot smarter than that. I think the brain is just going to try use the most amount of energy it needs to complete that task. Whereas what we can do ideally is we can have, with our rehab, is we can design a rehab program that takes into account not just the glute, but we can give the glute an opportunity to do work by delaying knee extension. Okay, now how we do that, I'm going to talk about that in the next episode. I'm going to give you an actual test that I use clinically that will help you to decide if maybe your hamstring and gastro can tolerate enough load to progress your patient to standing. Okay, and that's all coming up in the next episode. So hopefully I've just made you think about things a little bit. This podcast, it's a little bit hard to explain over a podcast. I think you come onto my blog, you're going to see what I'm talking about in the video in probably a minute. That's probably, I'm trying to take 30 minutes to explain to you here. Now, if you are driving in a car and it's safe to do so, I want you to do one thing for me, just to stimulate some thought. So what are we doing a lot clinically at the moment? We're trying to activate our glutes, okay, by pushing through the heel. Okay, now if you push through your heel, okay, if your foot's on the floor and you push through your heel, okay, what does that drive? Okay, so when I push my heel through the floor, you're going to see that we're going to get a lot of, obviously, we're going to feel our proximal hamstring, but we're also going to see that our ankle, by shifting the weight back to our heel, we're almost engaging dorsiflexion. Okay, now you do the opposite. You push through the midfoot and forefoot and you squash an orange. Okay, imagine that cue, squashing an orange. Okay, what's the first thing that has to happen? Okay, you plantar flex, your gastro, your distal hamstrings are going to be engaged more, and then hopefully you'll feel your bum react, where you'll feel like you're pushing, you're getting lifted up off the chair ever so slightly. Okay, now if you're not feeling your hip react, then that could be an issue with your hamstring and your gastro, which we're going to talk a lot about in the next podcast. Okay, so that hopefully will just set the scene for the next podcast. I personally think a lot of people are causing a lot of issues. I think they're working a lot harder than they need to, and I think our cues of this obsession with pushing through the heel, I think is causing a lot of problems these days. Okay, we've gone through early 2000s of people, knees gone too far forward, a lot of patella tendon, Achilles issues. So what do we do to try fix that? We became obsessed with pushing through the heel. Okay, I remember, I was cueing that, push through the heel, this vertical shin angle. I was a big advocate of that. Now I think that's absolutely ridiculous. Okay, and I'll talk a lot about that. Even with a patella tendon issue, I think a vertical shin angle now, I think it's limited. Okay, and I think we can get everything to do its job. I'll talk a lot about that in the next podcast. Okay, so to summarize today's episode, When we're sprinting, we want the foot to hit the floor. We want the knee to be obviously 25 degrees flex, whatever it is, 15 to 25. We want that knee to stay stable, i.e. we want a good co-contraction at the knee. If we can keep that co-contraction in the knee, then the hip can do work. Okay, as we go on to the forefoot and toes, then at toe off, then the knee can extend, and then we've got everything doing its job. Versus a lot of people, what I see is as the foot hits the floor, they may sink a little bit. We get an eccentric loading through the quad. So that again, then once we get that eccentric loading through the quad, that's putting the distal hamstring and the proximal gastro in a shortened position, which makes it harder for them to work. Okay, so we're probably then going to end up with that reaction of a knee snapping back. The knee snaps back, the quad's doing work, a lot of work. The glute max now is at end, or the hips at end range, so the glute max is in a shortened position. That gets that's a lot more energy expensive to do work. Okay, so the knee flexing as the foot hits the floor, or the knee extending too early, it puts the length tension relationship of the hamstrings and the gastro, specifically distal hamstring, proximal gastro, and then also the knee snapping back is going to put the glute max in a maybe inefficient length tension relationship, if you want to talk it like that. So what do we want to happen? We want the foot to hit the floor. Or what do I want to happen? I want the hamstring and gastro to co-contract with the knee. I want to keep that knee from snapping back too early so that the hip can do work, not the knee. Okay, and then I want the knee to extend after the hip's done its active bit. So in a nutshell, I want everything to do its job. If that can happen, then the calf and the hamstring could do their job. Biarticular muscles, we can transfer that energy through these tissues, maybe utilize some of that energy at the hip, and then send it down to the knee, do work at the knee then. Okay, so that's ideally what I would like to happen. I think a lot of issues are happening these days as well, or they're not happening or causing it, but I think a lot of people are reinforcing this stuff by this cue of pushing through the heel. Okay, so again, push through the heel, we will engage our hamstring and glute definitely, but I think personally, and again, I need some EMG studies to prove this, but I think personally, in my opinion, that heel equals distal glute max, proximal hamstring, midfoot forefoot equals proximal glute max, distal hamstring, proximal gastro. Okay, I think we would see that in EMG. I'm pretty confident. Okay, what does that do? Midfoot forefoot, that's going to allow delay knee extension. It's going to allow the hip to do work. And that's a big part of what I utilize in my return to play. But not only that, it's about getting that ability to tolerate that greater exposure to load in 3 planes of motion. Okay, why has someone lost the ability to co-contract at the knee? Why isn't the gastro or the hamstring doing its job, or the glute? Why is maybe the patella tendon, the Achilles, the soleus? Why are all these tissues, or the distal calf? Okay, again, how many calf tears have we got at the myotendinous junction distally? We rarely see proximal myotendinous junction tears in the calf, or certainly I don't see that many. You look at all these pathologies, and we have to start asking ourselves what's not doing its job to cause these areas to overload in the first place. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. The blog, this podcast, I feel like it's a little bit wishy-washy because it's hard to see. Hopefully you can see in your mind's eye what I'm describing. The best thing to do is go to www.thegotophysio.com/blog, and then that should give you a much better idea of kind of the visuals of what we're trying to talk about. But as I said, foot hits the floor. Think about that knee snapping back, or the knee maybe excessively flexing as the foot hits the floor, and the implications for that. Okay, ideally as that foot hits the floor, we want the soft knee, so to speak, but we want that pre-tension to happen just as the foot hits the floor, and then we want the delay knee extension to allow our hip to actually do active work and extend us through. So that's why I think the glute max, it's only as good as the hamstring and the gastro allows it to be. Okay, if the gastro and hamstring aren't doing its job, which is i.e. the main job is to delay any extension, okay, and closed chain, Then if it doesn't do that, knee snaps back, and then we're at end range hip extension. So then it's going to be very, very difficult for the glute to do work. Usually what I see then is I'll see them elevate the rib cage, arch the back, etc. And we're going to talk a lot about those cheats, or maybe those movement strategies, not cheats, probably cheats a bad word, but those movement kind of strategies that they use as a result of this in the next podcast. I'm going to give you a clinical test that I use to make sure that we have an ability of the gastro and hamstring to tolerate high loads so that the glute can be successful in the real world. And these cues that I'm going to give you make a massive difference to a lot of your back pain patients, your Achilles, your knee pain patients as well, and hopefully stimulate some thought. Okay, so that's it for today's episode. If you want more information, there's plenty more clinical content. There's more high-level strategies about how to build an ethical, profitable private practice, how to become that, achieve your dream job in pro sport by heading over to www.thegotophysio.com. And we've got lots of resources there. I've got my 6-step patient adherence checklist. You can grab a copy of my book. Over there, we've got a YouTube show, links for that over there where you can go on YouTube and watch the show, and lots of other great resources. So that's www.thegotophysio.com. Okay, so thanks for listening today. I appreciate you giving your mind to this. I appreciate that your probably initial reaction is, the guard's going to go up, this feeling of, maybe uncertainty of what we were doing in the past. It's a tricky emotion, and certainly when I started to piece the puzzle together from the various people I was learning from, and I started to focus on this a lot more. I know it's massively made a big impact on the results that we're getting here, and most importantly, long-lasting results. Okay. So as I said, I appreciate your open mind to this stuff. I appreciate you taking it without getting that emotional reaction. Okay, or it's okay if you have an emotional reaction, but then we just need to start thinking about this logically after that. Okay, so that's it. Sorry I got too deep into that. I don't even know where I was going with that. But anyways, so thank you for your attention today. I appreciate it. I appreciate your time. And as I said, it means the world to me that you're listening to this. You've got a bit of interest in my work. And you can head over to my website, thegotophysio.com, for more information. And I'll see you on the next episode where we start to apply this kind of theory into clinical content, because that's the main thing, that we can actually implement this in the real world. And I'll give you a bridge test that I use to quickly see if we can tolerate load through the hamstring and the proximal gastroc. So I'll see you on the next episode. Speak to you soon, and enjoy the rest of your day, evening, or night. Hey, I hope you enjoyed today's show. For more information, please visit www.thegotophysio.com, where you can download my 6-step patient adherence checklist absolutely free, as well as read the accompanying blog that goes with today's episode. We've got lots of cheat sheets and clinical content to help you implement to get real world results with real patients, that ultimately helps you become the go-to therapist and allows you to build a profitable, busy private practice, or become that go-to therapist in professional sport. I'll speak to you soon on the next episode.